Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this Thursday for our Power Automate Power Hour. My name is Kelly and I'm the Marketing Director here at bizappsuk. For those of you that have been to our previous sessions, welcome back. And for those of you that don't know us, we are Power Platform specialists based in Manchester. Now, we're Microsoft Gold partners and we work with businesses across all sectors and all sizes, particularly those in the SMB space, to help them with the analytics and automation requirements. So we've held a few of these sessions with Ingram now, and the purpose of them is to help you as partners better understand the Power Platform itself, how it works, how businesses can gain true value from it, and subsequently leave you with a much better idea as to how you might be able to incorporate it within your service offering. So today's session itself is specifically focused on Power Automate, and the aim of it is for you to leave with a much better understanding of how it can be used and its capabilities. So here's a little summary of what we're going to be covering off today. So in a moment, I'm going to be handing over to my colleague Zen. Just bear with me a second while I pop the agenda on. There we go. So in a moment, I'm going to be handing over to my colleague Zen, who is one of our Power Automate developers here at bizappsuk. Zen is going to give you a brief overview of Power Automate and take you through a demonstration as to how it can be used. And as part of that, he will be outlining a typical business process as it currently is, so that you can clearly understand how Power Automate has made that process more efficient. If you've got any questions at all throughout the session, please pop them in the chat because I'm going to be reviewing those throughout. You will see a couple of poll questions at certain points, the first of which is appearing on screen now. Or any second now, and these are just going to help us to understand your knowledge. So it'd be really grateful if you're able to fill them in. So again, first one there, just to get an idea on what's brought you to today's session. So really appreciate your help with those. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Zen.
Thanks, Kelly. My name is Zen. So in today's session, we're going to be taking a closer look at Power Automate, including its low-code environment, and creating a Cloudflow that's going to incorporate two of the features, AI Builder and Microsoft Approvals. Just a brief introduction into Power Automate. So, as described by Microsoft, Power Automate is a Microsoft Power Platform-based software for the automation of recurring tasks. Some of those flows will include automated flows, instant flows, and scheduled flows. Automated flows are just an automation triggered by an event. So it could be an email arriving, it could be a new file that you've created in SharePoint. It can even be your name mentioned in a Teams channel or your company name mentioned in social media. An instant flow is just something that's started with a click of a button. It's usually used in Power Apps. And a scheduled flow is just much the same thing, automation that's going to occur at scheduled time. So it could be like a daily upload or daily download of your data. AI Builder is just a Power Platform capability. It's going to allow your business to use intelligence to get insights from data. So usually you'd have to create or amend a complex AI model, which is comprised of machine learning algorithms. But AI Builder just supplies you a choice of pre-built and custom model types that you can use to understand and process text, process documents such as PDFs, detect maybe things in images or objects in images, and you can even predict business outcomes using maybe even customer sentiment. Now, Microsoft Approvals, they're just a very sort of simple way of streamlining all your requests and all your processes within your teams. It could be an email approval. You can even have Microsoft Teams notifications. So if a document needs to be approved, you can just send a request to the person who needs to be notified. So a lot of that was sort of high-level information, but we're going to try and orientate everything around a example business process. So that example business process today is oriented around bizappsuk. So bizappsuk currently has an inbox that suppliers send invoices to. Now the person responsible has to periodically check their inbox for new invoices. They then have to manually check each invoice and then approve or reject that invoice. And then they send an email to the accounts team. And then the accounts team finally has to enter the data into the system. Now, each invoice is taking approximately 15 to 30 minutes. And it's something that is going to take a lot of time. The person's absolutely sick of it. They're desperate for a solution. So our goal today is to automate this process from start to finish. And the only user interaction that is going to be required is obviously the person responsible approving that invoice. So our solution is going to incorporate, number one, an automated Cloudflow. It's going to contain all the steps that we need. So the Cloudflow is just going to be our Microsoft Power Automate Cloudflow that's going to contain all of our steps, everything that needs to be automated, everything that the user is doing currently. And it's also going to contain the trigger. So when that email is received, it's going to start the flow. And then we're going to use Microsoft approvals just to send an approval to the user. And we're also going to send them the invoice itself. So that's the attachment. And then they're just going to go ahead and approve or reject that invoice. And then finally, we can use AI Builder just to process the PDF itself. So the invoice with all the information on it, the contact, the account, and the amount. And that's then going to finally just be put into, in this case, just an Excel file. So now we've established that, we can go ahead and jump into our demonstration. So to get into Power Automate, you can, number one, go to office.com and just click in this little icon here and go to Power Automate, and it'll take you to something that resembles this. I think it's a slightly different tab. Yeah. And then just go ahead and click My Flows. Give that a second. And then from here, we can go ahead and start building our solution. So in this first section, what we want to be doing is we want to, number one, create the flow that's going to include the trigger. So when the email comes in, we need something that's going to detect that email and kick off the flow. Then what we're going to do, we need to filter out the emails that sort of are related to just invoices. So obviously, a person is not just going to be receiving invoices, they can be receiving many other emails. So we're not interested in those emails. We just want invoices. And then finally, within an email itself, we want to filter out any attachments that are not invoices. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. And then finally, save that attachment in a SharePoint folder. So we can now go ahead and create our flow. So in My Flows, click New Flow. And here you'll be given a few different options. I'm going to click Automated Cloudflow. Let's give it a name. So the flow name here, I'm going to call it Bespoke Invoices. And if you look here, we've got quite a few options of different triggers. So this is just straight away giving us a lot of control, a lot of options. As you can see, there's a lot of different things we can do. And I'm just going to go ahead and go to the Office Outlook section. So you can see by the icon. I'm going to click when a new email arrives. So that's the trigger. When a new email arrives, it's going to start our flow. So click Create. And now we're taken to this sort of environment, and you can straight away see the sort of low-code philosophy that Power Platform is all about. So instead of lines and lines of code, we've got this one tile here that basically has created our trigger. And if you just click on, if I click on Show Advanced Options, you'll see that we still maintain quite a bit of control. I can specify exactly what I want to do when that email arrives. So these are basically filters, things that are going to sort of limit which emails are being processed in this flow. So if we ignore these, we've got this first one here that says include attachments. So obviously we want to include attachments, so click yes. And now the subject filter is going to be how we solve that first problem, which is filtering out emails we're not interested in. So I'm just going to type in bespoke invoices. Obviously this could be anything, but what this means is only emails with the subject bespoke invoices will come through. And you can even filter out, based on importance. And then we're just going to filter it further by saying only attachments. I'm going to put that to yes. So we can now, we finish this trigger, we can now add in a step in our flow. So I'm going to go ahead and click new step. Now, what we need to do next is filter out attachments that we're not interested in. And what does that mean? Well, in an email, especially if you work for with any kind of business, you're usually going to have somebody's signature in the email itself. And Microsoft Flow will pick up those attachments as well as the attachment itself, because it will treat those images in that signature as an attachment. So we don't want to process logos, company logos, from someone's signature. So we need to put in a condition. So a condition is basically a question we're going to ask in this sort of flow, and we, depending on the answer, the flow will take a different route. So if this condition is true, we'll go down the yes route. If it's false, we'll go down the no route. So what does that mean? Well, we've got an option here to choose a value, and we get this sort of icon up here. Now, a dynamic value sounds complicated, but it's just things that have been generated from a previous step in the flow. So here, we can take all the information that was created from this email trigger from the Outlook. We can take the mailbox owner and sender the message. We can take the subject, the body. Now, luckily, we have something called attachments is in line. So an attachment is in line. In line just means it's in the body, so in the lines of the email. So any attachments that are currently in the body of the email, we don't want that. So if the attachments is in line, what that means is it's in the body, so we don't want that. So what we want to say is if attachments is not in line, go down the yes route. So I'm going to put false in here. So when an attachment comes in, it's going to check if it's in line, and if it is, it's not. So it's going to go down the yes route because it's passed this test here. Another thing that I don't know if you noticed, but Power Automate is pretty smart in it's determined that there are multiple attachments. So each email could have multiple attachments, and it's just stuck everything in a loop. So that loop is just going to go through each attachment and it's going to do this flow for each attachment. So now that we've filtered out the emails that we're interested in, we filtered out the attachments that we're not interested in. The next step is to save this attachment in a SharePoint folder. So I'm going to go ahead and click add an action, obviously down the yes route, and it's going to be create a file, which is here in the SharePoint. And now I just need to navigate and just tell where to save. Into attachments, and once again we can use this dynamic content because it's expecting a file name. So I could type obviously any file name I wanted. You can manually type file, whatever file name you want. However, each attachment needs to be unique in a sense, and we're just going to preserve the same name that the attachment was sent as. So if we go down in the dynamic values and new memorize, we should have attachment's name. I need to put that in. And our file content basically is just what you're saving in there. So in our case, we're trying to save that PDF, and once again, Power Automate is smart enough to know it's only going to be pulling files. So this is attachments content here. So this is the attachment itself. So we click that. Okay, so this is the first section is finished. We can now give this a test. So if we click save. And wait a second. And what I need to do now, we need to test it. So testing it is going to sort of kick start the flow, and then it's going to wait something to trigger the flow. In this case, it's going to be an email. So I'm just going to send myself an email. just to make things a bit easier. And then when the flow detects that an email has been received, it's going to start the flow. So I'll go ahead and test. Wait for it to start. Now we'll send an email. Hopefully we'll see it. So I received the email. Hopefully we'll see it start. Sometimes it takes a few minutes. Perfect. So our flow has run successfully. We go back. Oh, sorry, excuse me. I'll just show you. So there is another view or environment that's basically showing you how the flow has run. So as you can see here, it tells us how long it took. Obviously 0 seconds to trigger, and it tells us how long each step took. So overall it took 1 second, and then it tells you each step if it was successful or not. In this case with green ticks, sometimes you'll have red ticks. And we can just quickly test that it saved the file. So if I go into my location, we can see this invoice here. So this is our invoice itself that we're going to be processing. That was attached in my email. And if I just compare it to the email I attached it to, obviously it's going to be the same one. As you can see there. It's 1191, 1191, same invoice. I'm going to close that. If I go back to my flow. Okay, so the next step now is using Microsoft approvals. So you imagine the emails come in, the invoice is attached, the person's read the invoice, he's happy, they're happy or unhappy with it, and then they'll send sort of an email to the accounts team. So we need to automate that. So in this section, we're going to send an approval request in Power Automate, and then we're going to wait for that approval response. So we have to wait for the response before carrying on with our flow, and then we need to send an email confirmation. So if we go back into our flow, click edit. Give that a second. Open up our apply to each, open up our condition, and then we need to add a new step after the S. So click add an action. Give that a second. You can manually scroll through all these different options here, but there's quite a lot of different things that you can do. So I just recommend typing in here and searching. So if I type, that will filter things out. So we've got a few options here. So what we want is we want to start and wait for an approval. So that's the one we want. So we're going to click on that. And then approval type. So here you can actually, if more than one person is required to approve or reject the document, you can click that. We've got first to respond, and then you've got some custom responses. For now, we just need first to respond because there's only one person. So I'll go ahead and click that. And this should open up the tile. Now we need to give it a title, so we can type please approve invoice. And we can even say, we can use this dynamic content to say which invoice. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to put in the attachment name again. So that's just going to take the attachment's name for every attachment and append it to this bit of text here. So it's going to say, please approve invoice at Ingram invoice 01, whatever the code was. And then here you can specify to whom the email is being sent. So this will send two notifications. It's going to send the Teams notification, and it's also going to send an email notification. So in this case, I'm just going to send it to myself or the person who received the email. So we can do that once again, just with the dynamic content, and then to, because that was my email address. Obviously, that can be tailored to whatever you require. Just for today's demo, that's how we're going to do it. And when we open up the advanced options, we also, just to save the person of going into that SharePoint folder and checking the invoice, we want to send them the invoice itself. So once again, use that dynamic content. I want to give it the attachment name. I'm going to give it the attachment content here. So that is our approval step. So that's going to send an approval. And then based on that, we need to do something. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to send an email notification saying, yes, the invoice was approved. So I'm adding a new step below this, start and wait for an approval. And once again, we're going to use condition. So if you put in, if you enter condition. So this is the stage where we need to determine, has that approval been approved or rejected? If it's been approved, we're going to go down the yes route. If it's been rejected, we'll go down the no route. So once again, use that dynamic content. If we type dynamic value, we can now see everything that's been created by this step above. So the start and wait for approval. And there's quite a few different things that we can take. But the only thing we're interested in is the approval itself. And that's the response. So responses, approver, response. Now that's a little bit confusing, but we put that in. And once again, because there can be multiple responses, it's put everything in a loop. We don't need to be interested in that too much. In this case, we're just going to type approve. So if the approval response is approved, we go down the yes route. And for now, I'm just going to send an email notification when it's been approved. We don't need to do the same for the rejections. So I'll just go ahead, new operation, just type send email. It should filter everything out. Give it a second. Here it is, send an email. And I'm just going to send it to myself again. So and we can just say invoice using attachment's name again has been approved. And then for the body, we can say, actually, we'll type that in the body itself. We can rename it just invoice approved. Okay, so now that we've created our approval process, we need to go ahead and test it again, just as we did the first section. So what's going to happen now is our email is going to be sent. We're going to take all the attachments we're interested in, being the invoice. We're going to check if it's in line. Obviously, if it's not, we're going to go down this route. I'm going to save that file to SharePoint. Then we're going to send an approval response to the user with the attachment attached. And then finally, we're just going to check to see if the approver has approved it. And if they have, we send an email notification to say they have. So go ahead and test. So there'll be a few things happening here. Hopefully, what we'll get is two notifications, one being Teams notification and one being an email notification. Just going to go ahead and send my email. So this should take a few minutes. Maybe if you've got any questions, Kelly, we can go over that now.
Hi, Zen. Yeah, so just a couple of questions. So in terms of sharing, how can flows be shared amongst colleagues and businesses?
Yeah, so I'll go over that once this runs. But there's just an icon in the, there's quite a few places you can do it from, but if you're just in the main, if I open it here actually, if I show you quickly, once this runs. and it's just the button here. So where it says share.
Okay.
And then we'll take you to a new screen, and you can list every user required.
Yep.
Give it 1 second. Okay, so yeah, and you can add users here. So this is currently just myself.
And so similarly, then if you wanted to turn flows off, would you do that in the same place?
Oh yeah, yeah. So actually, I think it's in the edit. So once you go back to the screen, well, the environment where we're editing the flow, there's just a button right at the top that we can turn off the flow. I'll explain that in just a second. Just because we've received this approval. So here we've got this approval, and it's sent the the invoice along with it. So the user's going to go ahead, open this invoice, check it's all correct. Blah blah. Yes, it's correct. And then they'll, depending on that, click approve or reject, and go ahead and click approve. You can type some comments in. We're not capturing those comments, so there's no point really. So now it's been approved. Hopefully, well, we can see it's straight away sent me an email notification. Invoice approved. Invoice Ingram blah 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 has been approved. So that is our second section. So we've sent notification to the user saying, please approve this invoice. And we've sent an email notification saying, depending on their action. So just going back to your point, okay, here is where you can turn flow. This is very useful if, a lot of times you'll create flows and just leave them, even if they're old. And then occasionally they'll run, depending on how you've set them. And you could have a few problems from that. So always make sure if you're not running, just turn that flow off.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so we can go back in. Well, actually, we don't need to edit the flow currently. What we need to do is start our third section, which is the AI builder. So this section, we're going to be creating a customized AI model. Then we're going to teach that AI model based on our PDF, so that invoice, where the data is, what data we need to extract. And finally, we're going to just stick it back into our Cloudflare. So if I just quickly demonstrate, if I open 1 second. So we need to capture a few fields from our invoice. And that is, number one, the date, which is here, the account, the contact, and then the amount at the bottom. So open the wrong one. And we need to store it in an Excel file, which is on our SharePoint list here. SharePoint directory, sorry. So here we have the date, the account, the contact, and the amount. So here, obviously, we need to try and capture those fields. So if we go into AI Builder, we click on Models. Excuse me, click on Explore, just so we can show you some of these templates that currently exist. So AI Builder will offer a series of pre-built models. So if one of your requirements is exactly the same as one of these models, you can just use that pre-built model and deploy it straight into your flow. However, if you do have more tailored, so for example, here's an example right here. So extract information from receipts. So we've already got a model in here for receipts. So if your requirements are exactly the same as this layout here, you can just go ahead and use it. Obviously, the chances of that are quite small. The accuracy will drop a bit. So, if you want the most accurate model, you have to create a custom model. So we'll go ahead and close this. And if you just look on the right here, we've got one tile called extract custom information from documents. and there's a little label there telling us it's a custom model. So we'll go ahead and click that. And we're just giving it a little example. I'm just going to go and click Get Started. So from here we can specify exactly where that data exists on our PDF. Just give it a second.
Just on that, Zen, then, so obviously you're working with a PDF there, but in terms of AI Builder itself, can it be used for, say, Excel or handwritten notes?
Yeah, it can be used for most documents. It's basically, if you imagine, it's like basically analyzing photos, so it's the same thing. It doesn't really matter what format it is. It will be able to do them all with varying degrees of accuracy, but you can always increase accuracy in different ways, which we'll explain in a second. So if I click, so here we've got a preview feature. So this is another good thing about Power Automate. Microsoft are always releasing new features. At the moment, it's in the preview stage, so it's not yet live. And in this case, it's region specific, and obviously we can't access it. But some features you will be able to use even if they're in like an experimental phase. What that means is it might not work, but if it works, great. Here's an example. So multi-page table, experimental. So these are just fields that you can extract from your invoice or from your document. You can say checkboxes. You can extract the whole table, and then the experimental sort of phase feature is a multi-page table. So currently that probably won't work, but it may work for your requirements. So it's just one of those things that Microsoft just allows users to see what's coming. So we just need a field. And what we need to do is we need to tell this AI builder, tell the model what fields we want. So these are the 4 fields that we require. So I'm going to go ahead and type in date. A new one for the account, contact, and amount. So contact, and finally the amount. And click next. So this will be the longest sort of process in this entire demo. But once you've got this model set up once, you can use it as many times as you want. So it's really a massive time-saving feature. So we need to add in a collection of documents. So these collections of documents are the ones that we're going to use to train this model. So for our purposes, because it's a printed invoice, very structured, very similar, the format's always going to be very similar, we only need the bare minimum number of documents to train the model. In that case, it's 5. So the AI builder will require 5 documents to train it. The more documents you use, the more accurate it's going to be. So if you've got something that's handwritten or something that's more inconsistent, it could be a scan of an invoice or timesheet, whatever it may be. I recommend using as many documents as possible to train your AI model, and it will actually tell you how accurate it is at the end, which we'll see. Excuse me. So we need to add in a collection. And click Add Documents. Set my device. I'm just going to go ahead. These are my 5. These are just previous invoices. And click Upload. And we can click Next. Now we can tag these documents. So you can go ahead and tag them. So we've got our 4 fields here on the right, and we need to tell the AI model where those 4 fields exist. So I can use this little cursor. I'm just going to highlight date here. It's going to come up with this little list. Obviously, I'm going to select date. And this is the account here, click account, contact here, and finally the amount. And then click next document here. Usually it detects every single document if it's very similar. In this case, it wants me to tag all these documents. So this, as I said, this is the lengthiest process, but we only have to do it once. So I'm going to go ahead and tag them. So date. If there's any questions again, maybe we could review.
No more questions, thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Kelly.
It's super intuitive, though. I mean, no question. It's just my observation that as you're doing it, you can imagine all of the different ways in which it's going to be used going forward by lots of businesses.
Exactly, yeah. And if you've used any kind of Microsoft product, whether it's Excel or PowerPoint, all the user interfaces are sort of
it's got that familiarity feel about it, hasn't it? And I guess I know as a business we're seeing more inquiries from people that are interested in Power Automate and how it can help their clients. Certainly for things such as approval processes and sales processes, maybe moving data between certain systems on a schedule, or simply just prioritizing email notifications. And I guess being able to do it all in this central place really makes it easy to do.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So we've tagged our documents, so we can now go to the next stage in our wizard. And this is the summary here. So now we need to train our model. So obviously we've got this button here to train it. So I'm going to go ahead and click train, and this is going to take just a few minutes to train it. And then we need to publish our model. So what publishing the model means, it's going to make it available to everybody to use within this environment. Give it a second. We could also rename it because it's given us this sort of default name. So it's just still training here. So as I said, even though this is a little bit slow, you imagine each person having to open those invoices and then key in the data into the system somewhere. Whereas this is completely automated. It took me maybe 10 minutes just to set this up. The whole process has took me, what, 30 minutes, 40 minutes? So it's a massive time-saving device. And from then on, you can just set that flow and it will run every time that email is received. It's really useful. I personally developed something very similar to this quite a few times for a few people. Oh, so it's trained, so we can go in and rename this first of all. So I'm just going to click on it. It's also going to give us an accuracy score, which is here, it's telling us it's 99%, which is as good as it's really going to get. So before we carry on, I'm just going to edit this to give it a better name, just because that's a bit vague. I'm going to edit the name. I'm going to call it Invoices AI Model. And then save and close. So now what we need to do is we need to publish this. Otherwise, it won't be available for us to use in our Cloudflare. So we can go ahead and publish. Once it's published, we can go back to our flow. We can finally just incorporate this AI model into our solution. Give that a second. It's published. Go back to my flows. Click edit. So we just open up our steps. So if you remember, the emails coming in, filtering out any emails we're not interested in, or filtering out attachments we're not interested in. We just want the PDF invoice. Saving it to SharePoint, sending an approval. Depending on that approval response, if it's approved, we send an email notification. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the AI model to extract the data from that PDF, and we're going to put it into this Excel file here. So I'm going to go ahead and add an action. See just below the notification, and we've got the AI builder here. Hey, this is the one we want. So extract information from forms, and then we select that published AI model, which is here. And the form type, PDF document, and then we need to give it the form to process. So once again, use that dynamic content and select the attachment content, which is here. So that's going to take that attachment from the email, put it into this AI model to be processed. And that is this sort of, that's all we have to do. So what's going to happen now is this tile is going to create some dynamic content based on what we've told the AI model to create, which is those 4 fields. So those 4 fields that we're going to stick in here are going to be generated by this step. So now, if you imagine, we've got that data sort of in this stage here. We need to do something with it. In this case, we're going to put it in Excel file. So if you click on Excel line, let's add a row into a table. So I just need to select this location. Where is it? Here it is. Give that a second to load. So obviously we've only got one table. Now it's going to bring up the four columns, the 4 fields that we need to populate. So if I click on date, open up my dynamic content, straight away we can see this dynamic content that's been generated by the AI builder. We've got contact value, contact data type. The data type we're not interested in, it's just going to tell us whether it's a string or a date or whatever. So for date, we need date value. So put that in there. So now we're just going to go ahead and map each of these fields. So we need the account value. Go to contact value. And finally, we need the amount value, just here. So just to recap, that email's coming in, the attachment being processed here, we're saving it to SharePoint, then we're sending it an approval, a response, and based on that response, is it going to be approved or is it not? If it's approved, it comes down this route here. We send an email notification, and then obviously we send that attachment to the AI model to be processed, and finally, the 4 fields will be populated in this Excel table. So we're going to see this happen live when I test it, and hopefully the 4 correct fields are populated in this table here. So if I save, always make sure you're saving and testing as you go along. Give that a second, and now I'm going to test it. So this obviously is going to take the longest period of time because it's the full flow. I'm going to go ahead and send my email. So I've sent my email. Should receive the email first. There it is. So the flow should kick off in a second. So it's running, so that's been successful. As I mentioned before, now we've got a yellow icon, amber icon, indicating that the flow is currently running. So I've just received the approval. So now, obviously, once again, I'll be checking this invoice, making sure it's correct. I'm just going to go ahead and approve it. Hit submit. And you will also receive a Teams notification. So I've just been given an email notification saying invoice has been approved. Now the AI model is examining that data, examining that PDF. It says the flows run successfully. So we can just open up this. It took 55 seconds. Open up each step, and every single one has a green tick, which means in theory it's worked. And just to check, if I open up this Excel file, you'll see it's added a new row in. And if we open up this invoice, we can double check. It's 15th of Feb to Ingram. 15th of Feb, Ingram, and £1,191. So that's worked as expected. We've had a successful demo. So hopefully you've seen from this demonstration how useful Power Automate is and how it can be used to really save a lot of your own time, a lot of your business time. That's it for me, really. Hopefully you've spotted. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, saying thank you for that. It's really useful. And certainly from my perspective, I can relate it back to positions or businesses that I've previously worked within. And, immediately springs to my mind when you'd be manually submitting receipts and attaching receipts to pieces of paper for your expense claims, or if as certainly from my perspective as a marketing team, any supplier invoices that we received, we would have to print them out and take them around to the accounts team. It's all so much wasted time and effort, and obviously adopting this technology is really going to help businesses become much more efficient. So thank you. And thank you to those of you that have attended today's session. As Zen said, we hope you now know a little bit more about a Power Automate, are feeling a little more informed, and understand how it can make your clients' businesses more efficient. So thank you, and have a good rest of the day.